What if the biggest story in the NFL right now has nothing to do with wins, losses, or even football? Because while fans argue about stats and draft position, there's a much quieter conversation happening behind closed doors, one that revolves around data, attention, and money. A lot of money. At the center of it all is Shedeur Sanders. On paper, he shouldn't matter this much. A fifth-round pick, a rookie contract, no massive cap hit. But then you look deeper and the numbers stop making sense in the best possible way. His jersey is outselling higher draft picks. His name is trending globally. He's being searched more than established stars. And fans across the world are buying Browns gear like it's a cultural movement, not just a football team. That's when the story changes. Because someone inside the building isn't looking at box scores, they're looking at spreadsheets. And that someone is Jimmy Haslam. Haslam isn't just an NFL owner. He's a lifelong businessman. And businessmen don't ignore assets that generate this kind of attention at this kind of cost. While other teams spend tens of millions chasing potential, Cleveland stumbled into something rare: global relevance at a bargain price. That's why this situation feels different. While the media debates whether Shedeur is ready, the organization is watching jersey sales, Google Trends, international engagement, and future stadium demand. And those signals are flashing green, loudly. This isn't just about a quarterback competition. It's about leverage, about timing, about whether the Browns accidentally found the most valuable marketing engine in football, or whether they knew exactly what they were doing. And once you understand that angle, everything starts to look different. The patience, the decisions, the confidence behind the scenes. Because if the numbers are telling the truth, this isn't a rebuild. It's an investment. And what happens next could change the Browns forever. Before you talk about arm strength, reads, or win-loss records, you have to look at the numbers. Because the numbers surrounding Shedeur Sanders don't behave like normal rookie numbers. They behave like something else entirely. Start with search data. During stretches of the season, Shedeur wasn't just trending among NFL fans. He was ranking near the top of global Google searches for athletes. Not rookies, not quarterbacks, athletes. That alone puts him in a category most fifth-round picks never come close to touching. Then there's jersey sales. Despite being drafted well behind other quarterbacks, Shedeur's jersey quickly became one of the top-selling rookie jerseys in the league. In multiple reporting cycles, it was outperforming players taken far earlier, players with more snaps, and players with more media hype coming into the draft. That kind of consumer behavior doesn't happen by accident. It happens when fans feel emotionally connected. And that connection wasn't limited to Cleveland. Reports and viral clips showed Browns jerseys popping up in places that don't usually care about AFC North football. International buyers, fans overseas, people who couldn't name the Browns, left tackle but knew exactly who wore number 12. That kind of reach is rare, especially for a rookie who wasn't marketed as a top pick. Now look at cost. Shedeur's rookie deal sits around $500,000 per year. That's not a typo. Compared to what teams usually pay for relevance at quarterback, it's almost nothing. Backup quarterbacks around the league make exponentially more than that just to hold a clipboard. So when you line everything up, global interest, merchandise movement, social engagement, and minimal cap impact, the picture becomes impossible to ignore. From a pure data standpoint, the return on investment is absurd. That's why some people inside NFL circles believe this story was never just about football evaluation. Because even if you strip away every on-field argument, the business metrics alone justify attention. They explain patience. They explain confidence. They explain why the Browns never seemed panicked about public doubt. And they explain why Jimmy Haslam would be paying very close attention. Owners don't need quarterbacks to be perfect on day one. What they need is relevance, leverage, and upside. And by every measurable off-field indicator, Shedeur was delivering all three almost immediately. That doesn't mean the football part doesn't matter. It means the football part wasn't the only thing being evaluated. And once you accept that the numbers were doing a lot of the talking early on, the next question becomes obvious. Who was listening the closest, and what were they planning to do with it? Once you understand the numbers, the next part becomes unavoidable. Who was actually paying attention to them? Because while fans and analysts argued about depth charts and mechanics, Jimmy Haslam was looking at this from a completely different angle. Not as a football purist, not as a scout, but as a businessman who spent his entire life identifying undervalued assets before everyone else catches on. And from that perspective, Shedeur Sanders wasn't just a quarterback. He was leverage. Haslam didn't become a billionaire by overpaying for things everyone already agrees are valuable. He built his fortune by spotting inefficiencies, situations where the cost is low, but the upside is massive. And the moment Shedeur's off-field metrics started exploding, that inefficiency became impossible to ignore. Think about the contrast. Around the league, teams spend tens of millions in guaranteed money just to hope a quarterback becomes relevant. They draft players high, market them aggressively, and pray the results justify the investment. But Cleveland found itself in a rare position: global attention without global cost. That's not normal in the NFL. From Haslam's viewpoint, the math was almost unfair. A rookie quarterback on a low-cost deal generating the kind of engagement most franchises spend decades trying to manufacture. That's not something you rush. That's something you protect. And that's where patience starts to make sense. Business-minded owners don't sprint toward short-term clarity if uncertainty is still producing value. As long as interest is growing, as long as conversation stays hot, as long as the asset continues to appreciate, there's no incentive to panic. That doesn't mean Haslam was ignoring football. It means football wasn't the only variable. Because ownership operates on a longer timeline, stadium plans, sponsorships, brand expansion, international reach, all of those things matter just as much as a Sunday result. And when a single player begins influencing all of those categories at once, that player becomes central to the long-term strategy. Some around the league believe Haslam saw something others missed, that relevance can be monetized before wins arrive, that attention today can become infrastructure tomorrow, and that controlling a narrative early can shape a franchise's future in ways the standings never show. That's why Cleveland never felt rushed toward a final answer. From the outside, it looked indecisive. Inside, it may have felt calculated. Because when a low-cost asset keeps increasing in value, the smartest move in business isn't to flip it immediately. It's to let it grow. And once you view the situation through that lens, the Browns' calm starts to look less like confusion and more like confidence. But that confidence didn't sit well with everyone, especially not with the people whose job was to judge the situation strictly through a football lens. The moment Shedeur Sanders entered the NFL conversation in a serious way, the tone around him changed, and not subtly. Suddenly, every mistake was magnified, every limitation was emphasized, and every positive moment felt oddly minimized. It wasn't that criticism existed, that's normal. It was how uneven the criticism felt compared to how other young quarterbacks were being discussed. That's where the double standard conversation started. Plays that earned praise when other quarterbacks made them were brushed aside when Shedeur Sanders did the same thing. Smart throws became safe. Tough pocket moments became survival. Leadership was reframed as attitude. And when he played through injury or imperfect situations, it was treated as an afterthought instead of resilience. What made this harder to ignore was who eventually started speaking up. When analysts with no personal connection to Shedeur began pointing it out, the narrative cracked a little. Former quarterbacks who had no incentive to defend him started breaking down film and saying the quiet part out loud, that the Browns weren't exactly putting him in the best position, and that he was still holding his own. That matters, because those voices aren't part of a hype machine. They don't gain anything by pushing a narrative. When they say something looks off, it's usually because it is. Meanwhile, similar performances by other young quarterbacks were being framed as proof of grit or intangibles. Same reads, same throws, same outcomes, different language. That inconsistency didn't go unnoticed by fans. And once fans start sensing uneven treatment, skepticism spreads fast. Clips get compared, commentary gets replayed, and suddenly the discussion isn't just about football anymore, it's about perception. The more the media leaned into doubt, the more supporters leaned into defense. Not because they believed Shedeur was flawless, but because they believed the evaluation wasn't fair. That pushback only amplified his visibility, turning every debate into a referendum on credibility rather than performance. Ironically, the attempt to cool expectations may have done the opposite. Instead of shrinking his presence, the scrutiny made him bigger. Every dismissal fueled engagement. Every skeptical take generated reaction. The conversation became louder, not quieter. And while the media argued over mechanics and readiness, something else kept moving in the background. Numbers, attention, and fan investment that refused to slow down. That's when it became clear this wasn't just about how Shedeur was playing. It was about who controlled the narrative around him. And while critics debated his ceiling, the interest surrounding his name kept growing anyway, forcing everyone involved to confront an uncomfortable possibility. What if the public was seeing something the gatekeepers weren't ready to acknowledge yet? This is the part of the story that quietly flips the entire debate on its head. Because once you look at the contract math, everything people argue about on TV starts to feel secondary. Shedeur Sanders is playing on a rookie deal that costs the Browns roughly $500,000 per year. That's not a typo. For that price, Cleveland gets a quarterback who's driving global attention, moving merchandise, and keeping the franchise relevant deep into a season where most losing teams vanish from the spotlight. Now compare that to the other side of the ledger. The Browns are locked into a massive financial commitment with Deshaun Watson. His contract carries a guaranteed cap hit so large that moving on isn't realistic in the short term. Cutting him would trigger a financial crater. Trading him barely helps. For at least the next few seasons, Watson is part of the books whether fans like it or not. That reality matters, because it means Cleveland isn't choosing between quarterbacks in the way people think. This isn't a simple starter versus backup situation. It's a layered financial structure where one quarterback represents sunk cost and the other represents upside at almost no risk. From a business and roster-building standpoint, that's rare. The Browns effectively have 3 different quarterback roles without crippling their flexibility. Watson as the expensive veteran whose contract has to be managed, a developmental option behind him, and Shedeur as the low-cost asset whose value keeps rising while his cap hit stays microscopic. That's leverage. It allows patience without pressure. It allows experimentation without panic. And it allows the organization to evaluate without feeling forced into an immediate decision that could backfire financially. This is why the situation never felt rushed. Teams that invest first-round money are under instant pressure to justify it. Every snap becomes a referendum. Every mistake feels catastrophic. But when your most intriguing quarterback costs less than some teams pay their third stringer, the urgency changes. And that changes behavior. It explains why Cleveland could afford to take a long view, why they didn't feel boxed into a corner by public opinion, Why uncertainty didn't automatically equal instability behind closed doors. Because financially, the Browns weren't trapped. They were insulated. And when you combine that insulation with growing off-field value, the math starts to look less like a gamble and more like a calculated hold. That's the part most fans miss. This wasn't just about trusting a player. It was about understanding that the cost of waiting was minimal, while the potential return kept climbing. And once you see how the numbers line up, the next question isn't why the Browns stayed patient. It's how long they can keep this advantage before the rest of the league catches on. At some point, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders stopped being about schemes, reads, or draft position. It shifted into something deeper and much harder to quantify. Culture. Because when athletes cross into cultural relevance, the rules change. They're no longer just evaluated by stat lines. They're watched for how they carry themselves, how they respond to pressure, and how they represent something bigger than the game. That's exactly where Shedeur landed. What caught many people off guard wasn't just fan support. It was who started speaking up. When celebrities with no connection to the Browns or the NFL began praising Shedeur publicly, it added a layer of validation that analytics can't explain. One moment stood out. Dwayne Wade, a three-time NBA champion and global icon in his own right, spoke openly about Shedeur's leadership, composure, and maturity. Not his arm strength, not his stats, his presence, the way he handles adversity, the way he speaks without deflecting blame. That matters, because Wade isn't known for handing out praise casually, especially not to young athletes outside his own sport. When someone with his credibility gets emotional talking about another player's character, people listen. Fans listen. Owners listen. Brands listen. And that endorsement wasn't isolated. Across social media, former players, artists, and public figures began echoing similar themes. Leadership, accountability, calm under pressure, a refusal to throw teammates or coaches under the bus even when circumstances weren't ideal. That image resonated, especially with fans who see more than just football in the quarterback position. For many, Shedeur represents a version of success that doesn't rely on being handed anything. A fifth-round pick, overlooked, questioned, asked to prove himself repeatedly, and instead of responding with bitterness, he responded with consistency. That's powerful. It's also why his appeal stretches far beyond Cleveland. People who don't follow the Browns still follow him. They see someone navigating scrutiny without losing his voice, someone handling criticism without collapsing under it. That kind of connection doesn't come from marketing campaigns. It comes from authenticity. And authenticity travels fast. This is where cultural impact becomes real leverage. Because when an athlete represents something people believe in, loyalty forms early and it lasts longer than hype. Jerseys stop being merchandise. They become symbols. Conversations stop being debates. They become defenses. That's when a player becomes more than a prospect. He becomes a figure. And once that happens, every decision around him carries weight far beyond the field, setting the stage for a level of influence that can't be coached or manufactured. It can only be recognized. And someone in Cleveland definitely recognized it. This is where the story leaves the NFL bubble entirely. Because what started as curiosity around Shedeur Sanders quietly turned into something that doesn't usually happen for a rookie, especially not a fifth-round pick. It went global. Viral clips began circulating of fans opening Browns jerseys and reacting with real emotion, not polite smiles, not staged excitement. Grown adults tearing up, kids jumping around like they'd just met their hero, people treating a jersey like it represented something personal, not just a team logo. And these weren't all coming from Ohio. Videos surfaced from places that don't typically appear on NFL heat maps, Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East. Fans who couldn't name 5 Browns players were proudly wearing number 12 like it meant something to them specifically. In some clips, people weren't even saying Cleveland. They were saying him. That's rare. NFL fandom is usually regional, generational, passed down. What was happening here looked different. It looked emotional before it was logical, identity-driven before it was team-driven. That's when some analysts started using words you almost never hear connected to rookies: phenomenon, movement, moment. And whether you believe the hype or not, the reaction was undeniable. People weren't just buying jerseys. They were sharing them, filming themselves with them, turning the purchase into a story. That's the kind of organic virality brands spend millions trying to manufacture and almost never succeed at. The key detail: none of this felt forced. There was no massive ad campaign, no league-wide push, no artificial hype engine. The content was raw, unpolished, real, and that's exactly why it spread. Emotion travels faster than analysis. For many fans, Shedeur represented something they don't see often: confidence without arrogance, resilience without bitterness, and success without apology. That combination resonated across borders, languages, and cultures in a way stats never could. This is where the Browns' situation became truly unusual. The Cleveland Browns, a franchise that has struggled for decades to build national relevance, suddenly found itself attached to a name that didn't need explanation. A name people were already searching for, talking about, and emotionally connecting with. That kind of attachment changes expectations. It turns casual viewers into defenders, supporters into promoters, and fans into ambassadors who spread the brand without being asked. Once that happens, the player is no longer just part of the team. The team becomes part of him. And that shift is powerful. Because when virality meets emotional investment, the spotlight doesn't fade quickly. It multiplies. And for an organization watching this unfold in real time, the implications are impossible to ignore. At that point, the conversation stops being about whether this is sustainable. It becomes about how you build around it, before the moment passes, or before someone else figures out how valuable it really is. This is where the conversation shifts from what has happened to what could be coming next, and it's important to say this clearly up front. What follows is projection and speculation, based on business patterns, timing, and how NFL ownership typically operates. But the dots are hard to ignore. The Cleveland Browns are preparing for a massive future moment, a new stadium. And in the NFL, stadiums aren't just about football. They're about branding, prestige, and long-term revenue streams that stretch decades beyond wins and losses. One of the biggest drivers of that revenue: personal seat licenses, premium seating, corporate partnerships, long-term commitments from fans who aren't just buying tickets, they're buying belief. And belief needs a face. That's where Shedeur Sanders enters the speculative equation. Around the league, star power has proven just as important as championships when it comes to selling future vision. Owners don't just pitch records, they pitch identity. They sell fans on who the team is going to be, not just who it is right now. Some fans believe Shedeur fits that vision perfectly. He's young, he's visible, he's already resonating far beyond the local market. And unlike traditional prospects, his recognition didn't need time to grow, it arrived fully formed. From a business standpoint, that's incredibly rare. That's why there's growing speculation that Cleveland's long-term plans may already be quietly aligning around him. Not because of one stat line or one game, but because of timing. If you're launching a new stadium era, you want momentum, optimism, and a player people are excited to identify with. None of this means a decision has been officially made. There's no announcement, no confirmation, just patterns. And one pattern stands out. Owners who believe they have a future star don't rush to discard them. They insulate them. They manage perception. They keep options open while value continues to rise. That's standard business behavior, not conspiracy. From that angle, patience stops looking like indecision and starts looking like positioning. For Jimmy Haslam, the stakes go beyond one season. This is about legacy, about transforming how the Browns are viewed nationally and globally, about entering a new era with something fans can rally behind from day one. If that speculation proves even partially true, then what we're watching now isn't uncertainty, it's runway. Runway for a future that hasn't been fully revealed yet. And that's what makes this next stretch so critical. Because if the Browns decide to fully align football decisions with long-term vision, everything changes fast. The conversation flips, the doubts quiet, the focus sharpens. But if they hesitate too long, opportunity doesn't wait. It moves. And in a league where attention is everything, the biggest risk is choosing the wrong face of the future. It's waiting until the moment passes to choose one at all. When you step back and look at everything together, this story stops being about depth charts, draft rounds, or even wins and losses. It becomes about scale. The Cleveland Browns didn't just find a quarterback. They found relevance in places they haven't reached in decades. And that relevance didn't arrive quietly. It showed up loud, emotional, and global. At the center of it all is Shedeur Sanders. Not because he's been perfect, not because the team suddenly turned into a contender, but because his presence changed the way people feel about the franchise. Fans who had no connection to Cleveland suddenly cared. People who don't follow the NFL at all felt invested. That doesn't happen often, and it almost never happens by accident. This is where football and business intersect. For Jimmy Haslam, the question was never just whether Shedeur could play. It was whether he could move the needle in ways most players can't. Attention, engagement, loyalty, long-term belief. Those are the foundations of modern sports empires. And by every measurable off-field indicator, Shedeur delivered that immediately. That doesn't guarantee championships. It doesn't promise smooth seasons. But it does create something far more difficult to manufacture. Momentum that exists before success. Momentum that survives criticism. Momentum that travels across borders and cultures without being pushed. This is why the conversation around him feels different. People aren't just arguing about performance. They're arguing about meaning, about representation, about opportunity, about whether the league still knows how to recognize value when it doesn't arrive in the expected package. And that's why this story matters beyond Cleveland. Because the NFL has always claimed it's a meritocracy, but moments like this test that idea. When a player brings undeniable impact but doesn't fit traditional timelines or labels, organizations have a choice: lean into it, or hesitate until the moment passes. The Browns are standing at that line right now. If they commit, this era becomes the foundation of something bigger, a turning point, a rebrand, a new identity built around confidence instead of caution. If they don't, this season will be remembered very differently, not as a rebuild, but as a missed window when the spotlight was brightest. Either way, the takeaway is clear. This was never just about football. It was about recognizing value when it shows up early, and deciding whether you're bold enough to build around it before everyone else catches up.